Guys, Nefer is looking to be a very strong DPS, probably one of the best in the immediate future. In this video I will tell you how to build her in terms of artifacts and weapons, and I will also tell you how to build their teams in order to get the best performance out of her when she comes out. I will also talk about investment priority, so whether or not you should go for a signature weapon and Constellations, and also possible investments for her supports and teams as a whole. I want to start this video by saying that Nefer is a hyper carry, in that she makes up for roughly 90% of the team damage, and so it's very important that you build it right, because any misstep in this sense will cause a huge loss for the team damage as a whole. Not even a character like Skirk is like this, because unlike Nefer, she has strong sub DPSs on her teams, like Escoffier and Fiorina, that can cover up for her eventual build deficiencies. Nefer doesn't have this luxury. Starting from the beginning, in terms of leveling her, she unfortunately has a new boss material that is dropping in Luna 2, but for the rest, her reward material is the Moonfall Silver, so the same as Lauma. Her enhancement material is dropped by the new Nodcry Fatui opponents, her talent material is the Elysium Scroll you can farm from the new Nodcry domain, and for the weekly boss material, you'll have to farm the chess pieces weekly boss. That said, it's not very important to level her up to 90. In fact, her main damage source is direct Lunar Bloom, and that is not affected by any level-related multipliers, unlike normal reactions like Bloom and Electrocharge, and it also ignores defense. In case you don't know, the higher your level is compared to the opponents, the less its defense will affect your attacks, but for direct lunar attacks it doesn't matter, because they always ignore defense. As a result, getting her to level 80 will be fine enough. Talents wise, you really only need to care about her elemental skill, because it constitutes almost the entirety of her damage in all cases. Her elemental burst is not very strong, to the point you can argue it's not even worth using it from a damage per second standpoint, and in that case her elemental skill constitutes 100% of her total damage, so yeah. Artifacts wise, she has heavy elemental mastery scalings and a little part of attack scalings as well, like most Dendro characters. However, the attack scaling is not really important. Matter of fact, the difference between having an attack sans and a generic HP sans on her is laughable. In general, what you want is elemental mastery sans and goblet and a crit circlet. The only thing you could argue here is if an elemental mastery circlet is competitive with the crit one, but that's not the case. It's a massive loss for her damage. Energy-wise, as I said, the burst is not very important. That doesn't mean it's necessarily useless, but in the scenario where you have to invest energy on her to use it every rotation, it's definitely not great. This is the case for her on any team that is not a triple Dendro composition. For double Dendro teams, you can expect the requirements to be around 130 or 140, depending on the rest of the composition. For triple Dendro teams, since you'd barely need any energy-related stat to use it every rotation, it's not bad. From a damage per second standpoint, it's not really a gain to use it, but practically it's more damage per rotation, so in my opinion it can't realistically hurt to use it. Artifact sets wise, not really a question here. The new Nodcry DPS set is unquestionably the best option. You'll need to have a second Nodcry character on the team to get the most out of the set, but if you plan to get Nefer, you should already have this as a pre-requirement, honestly. The only real competition here is Mana Shusei if you use Fiorina and a healer, while Gilded Dreams is considerably below. Now let's see your best weapon options, but first let me remind you that if you enjoy my content but you haven't subbed yet, please consider doing so because it really makes me notice your support. So, weapons wise, her signature weapon is a quite massive stat stick, as it gives her a lot of elemental mastery and crit. Most notably, it gives her 8% crit rate and an astounding 124% crit damage, which adds up to 140% crit value, the highest I've ever seen on a weapon. However, the relative difference compared to the free-to-play Black Marrow is lower than you would expect these days, lower than 30% in fact. Part of it is that Black Marrow is a really good weapon, as it gives a lot of elemental mastery and a big lunar charge bonus, but from a balancing standpoint, the biggest reason is that Nefer is a hyper carry. As I said before, she makes up for a very large portion of her team damage, and so a 24% increase for her is roughly as big for her teams as a 30% increase is for other types of carries, for example Flint's. In fact, just for the sake of comparison, while Flint's signature weapon is a bigger relative increase for his own damage compared to a free-to-play option, in terms of team damage, Nefer's weapon is more impressive. This is because on Flint's teams, Ineffa makes up for a big chunk of the team damage, which of course doesn't get increased by Flint's signature weapon. Anyway, from a weapons ranking standpoint, what jumps out about Nefer is that she doesn't have great 5-star alternatives to her signature. In fact, even 5-star catalysts that give elemental mastery are not that great for her and are just in range with her best free-to-play choice. The strongest alternative to her signature is the new 4-star catalyst that will get released in 6.1, which however will be only available in her weapon banner, and so it's rather exclusive. Basically, to get a premium level of performance from your Nefer, you'll have to pull on her weapon banner. Now, moving on, about her teams and support builds, something that is very important to keep in mind is the non-cry resonance that comes with the Ascendant Gleam effect, so when you have two non-cry characters on the team. This resonance will make characters that are not from non-cry give the team a lunar reaction damage bonus based on their own stat. In the past, we all thought this effect could stack through multiple characters, so for example, two non-non-cry characters could contribute to the total stat-wise, but this has been changed with the release of 6.0, and this means you have to pay more attention to how you build your supports if you want to maximize non-cry teams. Also, this effect is activated only by the character using an elemental skill or burst, and so if you have more than one character that can activate it, and one of those two has much more meaningful stats than the other, you also have to pay attention to the order of which you use your character's abilities. Just to contextualize, I made a quick list of characters whose main scaling stat fits the effect and characters whose main scaling stat doesn't. Theoretically, just for the focus on making the team better, so Nefer better, on a character like Xingqiu, you can sacrifice his own damage and build him HP, for example, so just to make the passive, the not cry resonance better, and theoretically that's a gain for the team, but this is much more complicated on sustained characters like Zhongli, Diona, Cookie, because healing capabilities are actually important, and so if you sacrifice their main scaling stat, then it might not be better for you. And so just as a reminder, if you have these characters who don't have a great main scaling stat for the passive, you want to use their skills before these characters that have a good main scaling stat, so the lunar bonus can scale off these characters in the first tier. As for the artifact sets and weapons, since Nefer is such a hyper carry, you really want to maximize the amount of supportive effects she gets. Obvious picks for the artifacts are the Deepfoot set, the Non-Cry supportive set, and the Instructor set, all of which increase Nefer's damage significantly. Out of these, Instructor is a bit harder to use, because as a 4-star artifact set, it comes with a detrimental stats compared to 5-star choices, which will hurt the character's performance. For the weapons, anything that can provide elemental mastery support is a good choice, so for example the Sapwood Sword, Forest Regalia, Key of Kinesut. Even if you can't maximize these weapons' effects consistently, they're just damage increases compared to traditional options, so they're worth using. Now I want to briefly talk about Nefer's Constellations, just to compare them to her signature weapon and see what is more worth to go for. For the most part, they're pretty standard, as they give very straightforward damage increases with no real change in gameplay. The C1 increases her Lunar Bloom reaction base damage, the C2 boosts her main passive and basically increases how much it buffs her damage, the C3 is the classic talent level increase for her elemental skill, which is her main source of damage. The C1 and C2 are similar in value to the signature weapon, but the signature is a little bit stronger, and since it's also more cost efficient in terms of pulls, I would prioritize that before the Constellations. Alternatively, in terms of investments you can make for your supports for the Constellations and signature weapons, I would honestly only focus on Lauma, because Lauma is the one support that for sure will not get replaced on her teams in the foreseeable future. Lauma is pretty good Constellations and signature weapon. Notoriously, her C1 makes her heal, which is a big comfort for Nefer teams because she doesn't have many good sustain options. Secondarily, her C2 is a big damage increase, on par with some on Nefer's Constellations, and her signature weapon is pretty nice because it makes her provide a lunar damage bonus to the rest of the team, which of course benefits Nefer's damage, although less than her Constellation too, for sure. However, I wouldn't prioritize any investment on Lauma over Nefer's early investment layers, those being her signature weapon and her first two Constellations. Each of these investment layers is a worth as strong as Lauma's Constellation 2, and so in terms of damage increase, getting her to C2 R1 will be the most efficient pull strategy. And with this, I'm done for today. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe, and also go check the first video I made on Nefer, where I talk about her kit and teams more in detail. Bye bye.